It's no secret that Japanese RPGs have been incredibly successful for a long time, but for some crazy reason on the Play Store, I'd say they're really overlooked when it comes to offline games. But of course, my friend, there's always one or another hidden in there, and you could say I did this curation so you don't have to keep searching. So today we're talking about some Japanese RPGs hidden inside the Play Store. Just drop a like and come with me. A little game that's hidden away on the Play Store. Let's talk now about The Last Remnant. If I'm not mistaken, this is also a PlayStation 2 game that was brought over to mobile. The story follows a young man named Rush Sykes in a fantasy world at war over magical artifacts called remnants, while he tries to rescue his kidnapped sister. The game was very successful at the time and still is today, mainly because of its somewhat different gameplay that reminds you a lot of strategy games. One of the main points is that you don't control just one or two characters, instead you control entire combat squads. This completely changes the way you play, but to be honest, it's still a pretty normal Japanese RPG. I might be crazy, but maybe this was the first big Japanese RPG released on the Play Store, and the interesting part is that it was released back in 2017. Let's talk now about Trials of Mana.
Stop this! I don't want to fight you!
If you know this game, you're probably a huge fan of the Mana series, because this game isn't even the original version. It's actually a remaster of a much older game. One interesting thing is the way you play. The story is extremely complex, and not only that, you play with 6 different characters and you need to finish the game with all 6 to get a better perspective of the story. The combat follows a more traditional Japanese RPG style with progression, lots of dialogue, and I'd say this is Japanese RPGs in their purest form. Considered by many to be one of the best RPGs ever released, let's talk now about Valkyrie Profile.
It shall be engraved upon your soul. Divine Assault, Nibelang Valesti.
This game was originally released on the PSP, if I'm not mistaken. It's basically a remastered and improved version of the PS2 version. The game tells the story of a Valkyrie who needs to find warriors to fight in Ragnarok, the end of the world. To do that, she descends to the planet to search for these warriors. In the game, you'll meet several different characters, learn about their stories, see how they were born and how they will die, and of course decide exactly who you're going to send to Ragnarok and who you will keep on your team. And that's without even mentioning its combat system, which is very different from a normal turn-based RPG, and I'd even say it's innovative. I absolutely love this game and I love the way it works. Let's talk now about WARGROOVE 2 Pocket Edition. Honestly, I don't know what the difference is between the Pocket Edition and the more standard version, but I have to tell you that I really like this mobile version. The story is basically about a great war. You play on your side and you need to defeat the enemy side. The game is much more focused on the battle system, and it really reminded me of a game called Advanced Wars. It's almost like a tactical RPG, but it can even be considered a strategy game since you control a bunch of characters. The combat is really good, the game has plenty of dialogue, and it's an extremely versatile RPG. This is an impressive game that also gets lost among the many games on the Play Store. It's a good RPG based on an anime. Let's talk now about YOHANE the PARHELION. This is one of those games where you don't need to watch the anime to understand what's going on, because it's pretty easy to follow, especially since it works almost like a roguelike. In the game, you play as the main character who ends up in the world of mirrors, and there she needs to find a way to escape. The problem is that all of her friends are her enemies there, and she needs to defeat them one by one. As you can see, the combat is a card game, which is also pretty similar to a turn-based RPG, but with cards for you to use. And of course, its roguelike style makes the game much more interesting and addictive. One of the most famous Japanese RPGs in the world also has a mobile version. Let's talk now about Monster Hunter Stories.
Oh, we're fighting. Okay.
You probably already know this game, the one where you need to prepare yourself to defeat as many monsters as possible and keep upgrading your character. This one is almost the same, but actually a little different. Here you collect monsters to defeat other monsters, kind of like Pokemon. The difference is in the monsters and the way you collect them, since you can even collect them from eggs. On top of that, the story is completely different, and so is the gameplay, since this game is a turn-based RPG. But of course, even if you've never played Monster Hunter before, this game is completely different and worth trying. Apparently almost nobody knows this game is on the Play Store. It seems like I'm the only one, but let's talk about it anyway. This is Romancing Saga. The first game was released in 1992 for the Super Nintendo. Unlike other traditional RPGs from that era, like Final Fantasy, the series is known for giving players a lot of freedom. The characters don't gain XP to level up. Instead, their stats and abilities improve depending on how often you use specific weapons and spells during battles. Honestly, I found it much more interesting than Final Fantasy itself because of its differences and also its much more creative story with more freedom for you to make your own choices. It's hidden away on the Play Store, but I only recommend it if you enjoy older RPGs. A classic old school RPG style. Let's talk about it now, and it's called RPG Alter Age. The game follows Arga, a young man who trains to surpass his father, who is considered the strongest man in the world, using a unique mechanic that allows him to switch between being an adult and a preteen. And that's one of the most interesting parts of the game. You can switch between being a teenager and a child, and this completely changes the way you play. For example, there are missions that you can only complete as a child, collecting things and even cooking for your father. As a teenager, you complete other missions, usually a little more complicated, which will start the game's main story. It has a very different concept, but as you can see, it really reminds me of those old school turn-based RPGs. Without a doubt, one of the most famous games on our list, mainly because it was released recently and got a port. Let's talk now about Sea of Stars. This is a game that a lot of people say feels a lot like older games, but with plenty of features from modern games. The game got a port for Android last year and became quite successful with a lot of downloads. To summarize the story a little, you play as two main characters who are kind of like the sun and the moon, and they need to join forces to defeat a greater evil. The combat is a bit more traditional, but there are some battles where you can really stand out if you know how to play well. This is one of the big releases, and you've definitely heard of it if you like RPGs. This is a Nintendo 3DS game that was brought over to the Play Store. Let's talk now about the Alliance ALLIVE daily. The story takes place 1,000 years after humanity lost a catastrophic war against a race of dimensional beings called demons. After that, humanity ended up living in an underground world. Your character eventually wakes up there and decides to start a rebellion to defeat them all. The game abandons the traditional experience level system. Instead, the character's maximum HP and SP increase randomly after battles. On top of that, it has quite a few differences compared to a more traditional RPG, and that's why it became so successful at the time. It's definitely worth trying. Of course, we couldn't leave a Final Fantasy out of our list, but this one is quite different. Let's talk now about Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles.
Right on. Right on.
And well, this is actually a port that didn't end up being very successful because the game itself wasn't that successful either, since it's a somewhat forgotten Final Fantasy. What's most impressive is its gameplay format, something completely different that doesn't really resemble a turn-based RPG, but it's also not an action RPG. The funniest part is that you don't see any of the really famous Final Fantasy characters in this game, since it's almost like a kind of spin-off. The game wasn't successful when it was originally released on consoles, and it also hasn't been very successful on the Play Store. If you like older RPGs, you're going to love this game because that's exactly what we're talking about. Let's talk about Knights of GRAYFRANG. We follow a group that includes the vampire knight Lisa, Princess Letitia, the mage Mylene, and Tom, a human summoned from another dimension who serves as a living blood donor for the group. Just like many older style ARPGs, the game has plenty of story and of course a lot of dialogue, but there's also exploration with a more traditional turn-based RPG format. Honestly, that doesn't mean the game is bad, but if you're looking for something with better graphics and a more unique RPG experience, maybe this isn't the best option. But if you enjoy an older Final Fantasy, this one should be great. A very different Japanese RPG with a management style concept as well. Let's talk now about MARENIAN Tavern Story. The story fits really well with the type of gameplay it offers. You inherit a huge debt from your family, but at the same time you also inherit a tavern where you can sell different things. After that, the game is basically divided into two parts. The first is where you need to go into dungeons and collect items to sell inside your shop, and the second is managing your shop, making it feel a lot like a management game. I always end up getting pretty addicted to this style of game, but I understand that it's a niche game. If you really enjoy traditional RPGs, you might not like it, but if you like trying new things, this could be a good option. This is another very different little RPG game, where it almost feels like a management system. Let's talk now about Master Healer KALE. Usually you end up playing as the main character, the great hero, the warrior or something like that. Like this is a slightly different game where you play as a healer on the team, so your focus now is staying in the back, healing your friends, and of course praying that you can defeat the final boss. It changes the perspective a little because of how you play, but other than that the game is relatively normal. You use your healing at the right moment, make sure none of your characters die, and eventually win the battles. It's very simple, but it has a very different concept, as you can see. I don't think we've talked about a tactical RPG yet, so let's talk about this one, which is pretty interesting. It's called Mercenaries 2. You start as Claude, the leader of the Silver Eagle Order, and your goal is to defeat enemy units in battle and complete each stage of the game. One interesting thing is that the game doesn't have much of a story. You're basically controlling a bunch of characters and defeating a bunch of villains that appear in front of you. However, the interesting part is that there's nothing automatic about the game, and defeating the enemies can actually be quite difficult. Another really interesting thing is that the game isn't simplified. There are several different pieces of equipment, abilities, and builds that you can use on your character. It's a very well made game. Besides Doom Destiny being a Japanese RPG, this game also tells the story of an anime. Let's talk about it now. The game is basically a parody of an isekai anime, where it tells the story of 4 characters who are transported to another world. When they get there, they're the chosen ones who have to save the world, and they need to actually do it. One of the most interesting parts is that they know exactly how this works, so they make a lot of jokes about it, and the way they play is completely different. Talking a little about its RPG system, it's a bit more traditional and also reminds me a lot of RPG Maker or maybe Final Fantasy. It has a slightly more humorous story, but it's very well made at the same time. Dragon Quest. The Dark Prince actually ended up being released on all platforms and of course on Android as well, and we're going to talk about it now. Honestly, I've never played a Dragon Quest game other than this one, just to make this video. But I picked up a few things about it, like how this time you actually play as the villain of the game. The story is that he is cursed by his own father, so he ends up using monsters to fight in his place. And yes, if you noticed, it's basically a Pokemon style game, but set in the Dragon Quest universe. You know, graphically it's a very impressive game. It has plenty of story, lots of monsters for you to collect, and even though Dragon Quest isn't that famous, this game is definitely worth trying. Maybe one of the more old school games on our list, of course you should start with the first one. Let's talk now about Epic Conquest. This is the first game, and there's also a second one for you to play, while the third one is a bit more focused on an online format. Generally, the story revolves around a city that you have to protect from a great threat. This happens in both the first and second games. This is a game made by fans for fans, and that's really impressive. You can see a lot of similarities with Ragnarok M, Final Fantasy, and several other very famous RPGs. I really like the second version. It's still my favorite, and I've heard that they still update both its story mode and the items in the game even today. It's definitely one of the most different RPGs on our list, and it's also an action RPG. Let's talk now about ETERNIGHTS. This game mixes RPG elements with a dating simulator. The story follows a character who is on a group date, but in the middle of it, aliens end up invading. So when our character is ready to sacrifice himself for the group, he ends up gaining powers that are the only ones capable of defeating these aliens. The combat is without a doubt the best part of the game. It feels a lot like a hack and slash, but the most impressive part is definitely the relationship system, where you can choose one of the main characters to date, all while of course saving the world in the process. Only people who really enjoy RPGs know that this game exists on the Play Store. Let's talk now about ASTRIS. The game is made by the same developers behind Ark Knights. It has an impressive turn-based RPG combat system where you also need to press buttons and dodge attacks with your characters. On top of that, the game features a very impressive open world for you to explore, with several different locations and a story that will keep you playing for hours and hours. This is the kind of game that a lot of people think doesn't exist on mobile, a story-driven game. It's incredibly well made, and of course if you like Japanese RPGs, this is a true classic. It's definitely worth trying. One of the most different games on this list, and that's because of how exactly it ends up working. Let's talk now about AFTERPLACE. One of the main focuses of this game is encouraging exploration, with basically no missions or quests for you to complete. But yes, the game does have an objective and a way for you to actually finish it, but from the very first hour you play, the game doesn't give you any indication of where you're supposed to go. You end up exploring the entire map, talking to NPCs, defeating enemies, and that's basically the main focus of the game, exploration and combat. It's a very different game, especially when it comes to its graphics, but it's a game that I think is worth trying. This game has some really impressive things about it, and of course it's also completely unknown. Let's talk now about PROFILLE. The most impressive thing about this game is the fact that it has a huge open world for you to explore. In the game, you play as the main character and she needs to reach the end of a dungeon to find some missing people. One interesting thing is that you start with only one character, the main character, but as time goes on you'll find NPCs that you can also add to your team. And of course the RPG format isn't exactly the most classic one, but it has a very well made story and plenty of freedom. A lot of people end up saying this game is similar to Pokemon simply because of its graphics, but the truth is quite different. Let's talk now about Cassette Beasts. I want to start by talking about the biggest differences in the game, which is that you use your character to transform into a monster that you end up capturing on a VHS tape. After that, of course, you get the turn-based RPG format. That's the main similarity it has with Pokemon, but after that, everything is very different. The story follows your character who gets trapped inside a game and needs to find a way out, so they'll face all the enemies in the game and eventually become the greatest of them all. It's an interesting game, especially if you enjoy turn-based RPGs, but also want something different. The first game on our list that you won't find on the Play Store, unfortunately, but it's still worth talking about. Let's talk now about CROSSCODE Mobile. Honestly, this game would be pretty simple to port to Android, and I genuinely don't understand why that hasn't happened yet. The story is about a character who is trapped inside an MMORPG. The main goal is to find a way out until he realizes that everyone is alive and that the world really seems like a normal world. So now you'll talk to NPCs and try to understand exactly how you ended up there. The game has very addictive gameplay where you have attacks that allow you to defeat enemies while moving around at the same time. It's a somewhat different game, but it still has that Japanese RPG feel. Without a doubt, one of the most impressive games on our list, and that's because of how many features it has. Let's talk now about Dokimon. And well, there's nothing better than a game that's very similar to Pokemon, and that's exactly what this game is. But I can tell you that only the name and the idea of collecting monsters are really the same. That's because, for example, the game has 6 different characters with stories for you to follow, along with more than 140 monsters for you to collect. The game also has more than 30 hours of gameplay and a huge universe for you to explore. It's a game that falls into the monster catching category, but it does a lot of unique things. It's definitely worth trying. And that's it for today. If you enjoyed these hidden Japanese RPGs, leave a like and subscribe for more games like these. See you in the next video.